All right, let's talk about something huge, something that's been around forever, worship. What is it really? In this explainer, we're going to dig into our source material to see what it says about its real meaning, its history, and, what its ultimate purpose is supposed to be. Let's jump right in. So let's kick things off with a pretty simple question. When you see someone bow down or kneel, what's actually going on there? I mean, it's way more than just a physical movement, right? It's a symbol, and it's a powerful one, and honestly, it's right at the heart of everything we're about to unpack. Yeah, at its very core, that act of bowing, well, it's an act of surrender. And that's exactly where our source material starts, by defining worship as something that's both physical and spiritual. So, what's the definition we're working with? Well, our source basically says that worship is all about humbling yourself. It's about surrendering your own will and just flat out accepting the total supremacy of another. It's a posture that says loud and clear, "You are greater and I submit to you." But here's where it gets really interesting, because the idea gets taken to a whole new level. This quote from the Gospel of John makes it super clear that true worship isn't just about going through the motions. It has to be an internal thing, something real, done in spirit and truth. It's all about the posture of your heart, not just your body. Okay, so now that we have that definition locked in, let's take a look at how this whole idea of worship actually plays out in some of the biggest, most foundational stories from the source material. This timeline here is a great way to see the big picture. The source points out these key moments. You've got the very first act of bowing from Abraham, then the first time the word worship is even used. Then, boom, it pops up again with the wise men in the New Testament, and its final mention is at the very, very end of the Bible. You can see how this one concept really frames the entire story from beginning to end. One of the most powerful stories about worship actually comes from the book of Genesis. It's the story of Joseph's dream. Here you have this young guy who dreams that his whole family, symbolized by the sun, the moon, and the stars, is going to bow down to him one day. And as you can probably guess, that didn't go over too well with his brothers. But then, look what happens. I mean, despite being betrayed, sold into slavery, thrown in prison, Joseph rises up to become the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. And the source keeps repeating this one key phrase through it all. The Lord was with Joseph. And because of that, this totally impossible dream of his becomes reality. His brothers, desperate for food during a famine, come to Egypt and end up bowing down right in front of him without even knowing who he is. The prophecy was fulfilled. But the story doesn't just stop there. The source is kind of pushing us to ask a bigger question. Is this incredible family reunion just a cool story from the past, or could it be pointing to something much, much bigger? Let's hang on to that thought. And that brings us to a really crucial point. If worship is all about ultimate surrender, then the question of who or what we're supposed to worship, well, that suddenly becomes the most important question there is. So check this out. We're now at the very end of the Bible. The Apostle John has just seen these mind-blowing divine visions, and he's completely overwhelmed. So he does what feels natural, right? He falls down to worship the powerful angel who's been showing him all the stuff. It's a totally human reaction. And this really gets to the core of a major theme here. Our human impulse is often to worship the messenger, the person or the miracle that's right there in front of us. But the divine command is totally different. It's absolute. It draws a clear line in the sand that you just don't cross. And this is the pivot point. The angel stops him in his tracks. You must not do that. He makes it crystal clear that he's not the one to be worshipped. He's just a fellow servant. And then he gives the ultimate command, the one thing that's supposed to be the focus for all of creation: worship God. And this wasn't some new rule. The source connects this final command in Revelation all the way back to the law given in Exodus. This idea that you worship God and God alone is one of the most consistent, most fiercely protected principles you'll find anywhere in the text. Okay, so keeping that ultimate command to worship God alone in mind, let's circle back to that question we had about Joseph's family. According to our source material, that whole reunion in Egypt wasn't just ancient history. It was actually a prophetic pattern, pointing toward an ultimate future act of worship. The source points out this really fascinating pattern. You've got Abraham, the nation of Israel, and Jacob. They all have these stories tied to going down into Egypt and then returning to the promised land, Canaan.
It sets up this powerful theme of being called away from home only to eventually be brought back.
So, what's the big takeaway from this pattern? Well, the interpretation is that Jacob's life is basically a prophecy. It's seen as a picture of a future time when his descendants will have their own great return and will call upon their Messiah. And just listen to the emotional language the source uses here, pulling it straight from that scene in Genesis. Just like Joseph and his father Jacob wept on each other's necks, this future prophesied event is described as a reunion filled with that same kind of overwhelming joy, a moment of ultimate reconciliation. And that brings our whole journey to a close with this final expectant verse from Revelation. It's an ending that's just filled with anticipation, right? It echoes that hope for one last great reunion, tying the very beginning of the whole story to its prophesied end. So, where does all this leave us? We've seen that worship is defined as complete surrender. It's meant to be directed only to God, and it's woven into this massive, unfolding story. The final question, then, is really for us to think about. In a world that's constantly telling us to be self-sufficient, to be in control, what does this idea of ultimate surrender really challenge in our own lives today? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.